Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Grace Covenant Chats, brought to you by Grace Covenant Church here in Philadelphia. I am your host, Caleb Watt, here with my tall co-host, as usual, Pastor Doug. Pastor Doug, how are you doing today?
I don't know how I feel about being called tall. Feels like it's all I am. Very one-dimensional, but I'm doing well. Thank you, Caleb.
Tall is a descriptor. You are like the one person to have to raise like all the tripods for when I'm setting up the cameras. So you are
sorry that my existence is a burden to you.
It's not a burden. It's just a characteristic. Yeah. It's a feature. A feature, not a bug, right? Shouts to all the programmers out there. But anyways, Pastor Doug, what are we talking about today?
Today, I want to talk about a fun topic, conflict.
Shoot.
I mean, if you talk about relationships, I've been talking a little bit more about like the positive side of it, how you grow them, how you invest into them and all that. But in any relationship, there's going to be conflict. It's unavoidable. I mean, it's only avoidable if you avoid relationship. But if you actually pursue good relationships in your lives, friendships, and dating and all that, you're eventually going to have conflict. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, particularly how we as believers can handle conflict amongst ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So how do we go about handling conflict, Pastor Doug?
Oh, question of the hour.
How do I, as a 9 on the Enneagram, peacemaker, go about handling conflict?
Yeah. Well, I think conflict is a tricky thing, especially in the church, because a lot of people have a lot of mixed emotions when it comes to how they feel about like conflict and how they feel about when they maybe get upset at someone. Say like, you hurt someone in some way and say you were hurt by someone in some way. And you're starting to think, oh, I want that person to know because I want to find resolution, which is good. But then, you start to think about it in like Christian terms. Well, I'm supposed to show grace. I'm supposed to like forgive that person. Maybe I shouldn't bring it up. What if they think I'm judging them? What if they then don't want to be my friend anymore after I bring it up? What if this like ruins like the friendship we have? Maybe it's better for me just to like swallow it and move on. And I know a lot of Christians, and I've talked to a lot of people who kind of go through all those thoughts when they have something against someone. And obviously we want to think through it because sometimes if we get hurt in some way, it's minor and maybe we should drop it and not really pursue it. But sometimes it can be a pattern, right? You notice that someone keeps doing something to you that is like hurtful in some way. Maybe they don't realize it, but it's just you're being hurt or like offended, or it's just like, it's just not, you're not enjoying something they're doing. And you recognize that like, yeah, this is not good. But then you start to think, I don't want to bring it up, right? You want to, maybe I just need grace, show grace. Maybe I just need a little power through this. But the problem with that though, mentality, is that it can often lead then to bitterness because you still have this issue, right? You still have this issue against this person that hurt you. But rather than trying to talk it out and actually seek resolution, you're trying to bury it. But when you bury it, it's still there. And it becomes like this, like, I don't know, this like damaged part of like your heart that sort of like festers and it can grow. And what that leads to is bitterness. And sometimes then friendships actually break apart and there was never even a chance for there to be reconciliation because at a certain point you find like you're just so bitter now because you never brought it up. You're so bitter now that you just like avoid that person, and then the friendship sort of just like fizzles away. And I wish this was like a random, was like a rare occurrence, but I've seen this happen in the church a lot because people don't know how to talk things out. They don't know how to resolve the conflict. And so that bitterness just grows unresolved. And the next thing you know, people are distant.
Yeah. That seems very, very relevant, right? Because you're always asking the question, at least for myself, it's like, yeah, like I feel like I have 2 stages of evaluation, right? It's like, 1, am I close enough to this person to bring up the issue? And 2, is the issue like actually big enough for me to bring up, right? But I think as you're talking about bitterness, right, it reminds me a lot of like Hebrews 12, where it's like, don't let the root of bitterness spring up amongst you, and by it many become defiled. And so I guess maybe we could tackle like some of those questions because I feel like they're pretty common, right? It's like, first one, like, what if it's just like an acquaintance in the church?
Yeah.
Not like someone I'm particularly close with, right? And the second, like, at what level is how do I know it's not just a me thing? And how do I know it's something that's worth bringing up that we have to almost like talk through? Because talking through something makes it feel very, very serious.
Yeah.
Even if it's like small.
Yeah. I think that we need to have a lower threshold for talking it out,
Mm,
because I think too often we are just more conflict avoided.
mm,
Obviously, you don't want to bring everything like every time you're a little bit offended, it's just because then you're just always going to be having these conversations, and it's just not, that's not, you won't get anywhere.
mm,
But the reason I think it's always helpful to tend more to bring it up is because when you bring it up, you get the chance for that person to speak about it, and you get to understand them.
mm,
Because too often we get more upset because we're seeing it all from our own perspective and we don't understand the other person's perspective. But when you can see the other person's perspective, it
mm,
allows you more so to understand a little more fully and to really show grace.
mm,
Because you can't show grace if you don't know what the other person is necessarily thinking, right? I mean, you
mm,
can, but it's harder because you don't know what that person's motivation or their intent was. You don't know if they're being completely malicious or they're just ignorant of whatever was happening, right?
mm,
And you need to talk it out to understand them. And the more that they're getting mutual understanding,
mm,
the stronger that relationship will be, right? That friendship will be so much stronger if there is mutual understanding. Because then you can say, oh, yeah, now I understand why you did that, right?
mm,
I mean, I still was hurt by it. I want you to understand how I felt. But now I understand you a little more. You understand me more. And then the bond of friendship is actually stronger. So that's why I
mm,
think we should skew a little more towards opening and sharing.
mm,
However, the one addendum to that I want to mention is that we got to be careful how we bring it up,
mm,
because I think that's key. Too often we bring it up when we are in that place of being hurt,
mm.
because maybe we hit that like that one thing that broke the camel's back, proverbial
Right.
camel's back, right?
Yeah.
And then the problem with that is they're speaking out of emotion, and that's not a good place because
Mm,
conflict that when you try to resolve conflict from a place of already being triggered and being emotional,
mm,
you're not going to be able to like really listen and understand.
mm,
You have to have a time in your mind where you say, "I'm going to talk about it with this person,"
mm,
outside of when I'm like hurt by that person,
mm,
outside of when I'm like emotional about it,
mm,
because otherwise it's not going to be a productive conversation. I'm sure many of us, have had times when we've had a conflict and we've spoken up out of emotion and we kind of
mm,
regret maybe some of the things we said, or we wish that we were able to talk about it in a better way.
mm.
So I would say that's the one addendum, is like making sure that we should bring things up, but not when we're in that place of being like triggered and being emotional about it.
Hmm. So, what is the role then of like other people
Mhm.
around you in that community
Yeah.
to maybe maybe facilitate the conversation or like talk you through like
Hmm.
being hurt by someone else, right? I know like one of the thoughts that I'll have or like that I've come across too, like within communities is like, well, I don't want to talk about how someone else hurt me because then it feels like I'm slandering them.
Yeah, like
Or like,
gossip,
yeah,
right?
or
Yeah.
gossiping behind their back. So it's
Yeah.
like, what is the role of other people and how can they help in this like
Yeah.
process?
I mean, this goes back to the idea of friendship and vulnerability.
Mhm,
When we're hurt by someone, I would hope that we have a friend that we can turn to and say, "Hey, like I was kind of hurt by this. Can you help me think through this?"
mm,
Because that's not gossip, right?
mhm,
Because you're trying to do this, you're trying to talk about it in a way that is helpful and productive.
mm,
Gossip is when you talk about something for the sake of just talking about it, right?
mm,
When you want to share knowledge just so that you can like show what you know. That's what gossip is. But when you have a
mhm,
conversation with someone, even if it's about someone else,
mm,
if it's with the intent of understanding, with intent of like reaching reconciliation,
mm,
that's not gossip. And
mm,
so we shouldn't be afraid of like talking to a close friend if we feel hurt by someone else, because they can give us wise counsel. And they might also be able to say, "Hey, you're overthinking this." Right?
mhm,
They can speak
right.
into our situation. And
Mhm,
so I don't want us to always like hide things. And I think that goes back to what I was saying before. Like as Christians, we too often tend to hide things or bury things because we think that's the Christian thing to do. We're like, oh, if I confront this person, I'm judging them. If I talk to someone else, I'm gossiping.
mm,
Obviously, we can be a judger, we can be a gossiper,
mhm,
but like if we do it wrongly, but we shouldn't hide things and bury things, just because we feel like, oh, I'm going to be a gossiper. Because talking to a friend about a way that you were hurt by someone else
mm,
with the intent of trying to understand and reach a place of reconciliation, that's not gossip,
mm,
right? Again, gossip is when you share things just for the sake of talking about it, just so
mm,
you can like look good, like look at this information that I know. And judging is when you say, I'm better than you because you do this, right? But if
mm,
you're hurt by someone, you bring something up to someone, that's not judging. That's just saying, hey, like I want you to understand me. I want to understand you. That actually draws people closer when you're able
mm,
to bring things up honestly and openly.
mhm. So then how should we go about, I guess, like having a conversation,
Hmm.
right? Because I feel like you like even with the best of intents, right? And like the most minor of offenses, just saying to someone, "Hey, we gotta talk,"
Yeah,
is
yeah.
like very awkward. And then the conversation is like, "Okay, well, what do you want to talk about?" And then
Hmm.
you had to break the ice and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So, what would your advice be to for going about like one of these
Yeah.
conversations? Yeah.
Well, I would say first seek counsel. Talk to
Mm,
someone else, a close friend, maybe like even maybe like a pastor or staff, or, someone just to like get thoughts and advice on it, just to make sure that you're not wrong, right? You're not
mm,
overthinking it, because that could be a possibility that you're maybe just overthinking something. You need to
mm,
hear that from someone else. So I'd
mm,
say first seek like wise counsel from someone else,
mm,
but then talk to that person again, not from a place of emotion.
mm,
Talk from a place of like stability.
mm,
So set a time, say, hey, can we talk here? And
mm,
then just approach it with gentleness.
mm,
Your intent going into that is not to make them admit they're wrong, right?
mm,
Your intent is that there be reconciliation and
mm,
mutual understanding.
mm,
Because maybe maybe you're the one that's wrong. Maybe you were seeing things wrongly, you didn't realize what they're going through,
mm,
or maybe they're wrong and they'll understand it, right? But
mm,
the goal isn't proving you're right, they're wrong, or they're right, you're wrong. The goal should be reconciliation,
mm,
and that means you come in it with gentleness.
mm,
You come in it with a hope that you'll be able to actually talk it out. You come with a willingness to listen
mm,
and not to disregard what they say.
mm.
It's hard, right? And there
Yeah.
isn't a one size like fits all sort of prescription for this. But I think the most important thing is to come in from a place of gentleness, come in with the motivation that you want to find reconciliation through this. That your goal in this conversation is a stronger friendship.
Mm,
And so, yeah. But again, be intentional about it. Like have a time to actually talk about it.
mm,
Don't like bring it up while you're doing something else. Like make sure that you're like sitting down, able to talk about it over like coffee or something like that.
mm,
Make sure that you're able to actually have a good conversation and not be distracted by other things.
mm. I guess as you're discussing this, right? One of my thoughts that I'm coming back to is like you said that the almost like prototypical Christian thing to do is to swallow it and to under the guise of like showing grace and
Hmm.
forgiving.
Yeah.
So how is that different from the grace slash forgiveness that's being shown in like if you actually process through it
Hmm.
right with someone else, and how does grace and forgiveness work into a conversation like
Yeah.
that? Yeah,
Grace and forgiveness is shown in you forgive, right? You should
yeah,
forgive.
mm-hmm,
But there's a difference between forgiveness and swallowing, right?
mm,
Because when you approach someone, you're able to actually forgive in a healthier way because then you understand them more,
mm,
right? Just forgiving and just like moving on and swallowing it,
mm,
that's kind of empty and shallow. And it ends up not really being true because
mm,
too often when that happens, like you tell yourself that you are forgiving that person. But then if you feel like hurt by that person again in a similar way, oh, it's just gonna come like
mm,
rushing back up because you haven't actually dealt with it. You haven't
mm,
talked to them. There's no real reconciliation, right?
mm,
Forgiveness is shown most clearly when there's actually reconciliation. Now, obviously,
mm,
reconciliation sometimes is not possible,
mm,
right? Say that person completely denies it and they're unwilling to admit that they are wrong.
mm,
At that point, you still have to forgive,
mm,
but you also have to recognize, hey, this person, they have their heart is hard, maybe,
mm,
and then you just gotta like love and pray for that person. But
mm,
maybe it's time to actually create healthier boundaries, right?
mm,
If reconciliation isn't possible, you have to make sure you create healthy boundaries to protect yourself.
mm,
But you can't. But too often people create boundaries and barriers with that person before they even have the conversation,
mm,
because they start to distance themselves. They felt hurt rather than actually talking it out. But you
mm,
should talk it out first. And if you can see that this person is not being willing to listen to you, to understand, then you can start to create, I think, boundaries in your heart
mm,
towards that person. But you should always seek reconciliation as best as possible. Firstly,
mm. I like that thought. It reminds me of Jesus, right? Because it's like, we're forgiven, right? Romans 8:1. But then there's also like Hebrews 4, right? 14 through 16, like great high priest passed through the heavens, but like can sympathize with our weaknesses. He's been tempted in every way.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, that forgiveness, like coming from that place means a lot more,
Mhm.
right? Than if it's just like God far off being like, oh, you're
Yeah.
forgiven. I just choose to ignore, right?
Mhm.
It's like he's lived it, and then it's like, yeah, you're forgiven. So I guess you kind of just touched on it a little bit as well. But I think my last question was almost like, what do you? what do you do in the case of like a broken relationship, broken friendship that's like been festering for a long time? That's like where the hurt runs really, really deep,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Sometimes at that point, it feels like it's not even worth trying to have this conversation because it's too difficult,
Yeah.
right? And maybe there were like as you're saying, like the emotional barriers or boundaries that have been set up. Maybe some unhealthy, maybe
Yeah.
some healthy, right? But like, how would you
Hmm.
go about like having one of these sorts of discussions where
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, something that's like very long standing and very, very deep.
Yeah. That's a good question because I think a lot of what I'm talking about more so more surface level type stuff, maybe
Mm,
moderate. But if it gets like really deep, a lot of hurt just is just so deep um and yeah, I would say at that point, before you should always again, you should always seek forgiveness and reconciliation.
mm,
But before you pursue that, I think you have to actually first deal with the hurt and find healing.
mm,
And so I would say to a person that really has like this deep level hurt from another person, they should first go through some sort of like either counseling or inner healing, or they should process through that hurt
mm,
because it's going to be really difficult for them to seek reconciliation if that hurt is like there and it's triggering them, right? Because
mm,
it's just not dealt with.
mm,
And that unresolved hurt will cause them to always kind of like react in unhealthy ways towards that person. And so you need to actually work through that first, like through like a counselor or with a pastor, through like inner healing, through something, right? You want to
mm,
find healing through that. And hopefully that path of healing will lead to a place of forgiveness.
mm,
And then once you're able to get there, then you can open up that door to try to find reconciliation.
mm,
But I would say, yeah, in those extreme cases, like when it's really deep, you definitely want to pursue some level of healing before you try to like actually confront that person. Otherwise, it's just going to be very messy.
mm,
You'll probably get triggered very easily and start to really not be able to have a healthy conversation.
mm,
But yeah, when you're actually able to like process through it, to find some level of healing through it, that will open up the door to reconciliation.
mm. I
Yeah.
see. I like that. Ooh, I have one
Mm.
more scenario, one more circumstance. How would you go about, or how would you advise someone to go about having this discussion if they feel like they've been hurt by like a community as opposed to just like one person in particular,
Mm. Mm.
right? Because like I feel like that's like a little bit different, but like
Yeah.
still somehow like because you're still dealing with people, but like as a group or as a collective, like you felt hurt by certain
That's a
things.
good question. I mean, ultimately, a group is made of individuals, and I think you have to
Mm,
figure out like with the individuals who hurt you, because if you're just sort of projecting it on the whole community, that's probably
mm,
not good, right?
mm,
You have to be able to distance. You have to be able in your mind separate a community from the people who hurt you,
mm,
because the community is made up of many different people,
mm,
and a lot of those people may have no idea about what those couple of people did to you.
mm,
Um, and so I would say you have to best you can try to separate that. And but second to that, in that sort of extreme case, you probably want to seek counsel,
mm,
talk to someone. If it's in a church, talk to the pastor.
mm,
Try to like just get to know them and say explain like how what's hurting you. Maybe they can help guide you and shepherd you
mm,
through that. If it's a different community, maybe talk to a leader in that community.
mm,
But I think you want to like open up about it. Don't just like hide it,
mm,
because maybe there is something like just toxic in that community and that needs to be dealt with, right?
mhm,
You don't want to like withhold that and leave, right? You should always try to seek to help a community grow. You don't want to just like, you know, so
yeah.
as best as possible, try to like shine light if there's any sort of like really like like systemic toxicity in that group, right?
Mm,
And so talk to a leader, and but come up from a place of humility.
mm,
Maybe again, you don't want to say, "Oh, that everything is bad, burned down," when maybe it's just like a few people in a
mm,
community who are hurtful and they have to be talked to and dealt with, right?
mhm,
Um, so try to be like humble about it. But yeah,
mm,
open up, don't hide it. Like talk to like a leader, talk to a pastor,
mm,
and be willing to like listen and understand. And maybe maybe that's a call that you need to go through healing. Maybe like the fact that you're hurt so much by the community, a certain community, maybe shows that there's something deeper actually in your own heart that's
mm,
triggering you against that. Maybe there's something that happened in your past, in your family,
mm,
particularly. Maybe there's something that's showing that you need to actually work through.
mm.
Yeah, I'm not trying to like. Obviously, you have to be careful when you say that because nowadays people might be like, "Oh, you're gaslighting, right? It's all me." But obviously,
Yeah.
it's probably a both and. Like we live
Mm,
in a messy world. It's almost always a both and. It's something in me and it's something in there. And you want to work on the both and, right? You
mm,
shouldn't ever put things into an either or
mm,
types of scenario because the reality is we're all sinful, and we all have to like work through a sin. And sin can be individual, sin can be systemic in a group, but it's
mm,
there in both. And so we have to be willing to to like address on both sides.
Right. Which is why it sounds like so important, right? To, as you brought up several times this conversation already, just to seek counsel from like
Mhm.
trusted people,
Yeah.
like having close friends who are willing to speak the truth in
Yes.
love, and like maybe even like pastors or like counselors, right?
Yeah.
People ahead of you,
Mhm.
mentors to be able to speak that into your life as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
say, yeah, there's one takeaway is like, let's not be careful to hide things because,
mm,
like you said, it just can lead to a root of bitterness.
mm,
And that's so much more unhealthy than anything else. Like allowing something to fester and grow, it will just lead you to a bad place and it'll make it
mm,
worse off for you.
mm,
We want to bring things to the light. Obviously, we want to bring things to light not so that we can prove we're right, they're wrong. We want to bring things to light so that there can be grace, so there can be forgiveness, and ultimately there can be reconciliation.
yeah. Isn't there like that one verse in Ephesians 5, like rise a sinner, for the light of Christ shines upon you, or something like that?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
in Ephesians. Yeah.
yeah. That's what it reminds me of.
Mm.
Well, do you have any concluding thoughts, P Doug?
That was my concluding thought. Let's not hide things.
Don't hide things. Don't
Yeah.
hide things. I like that. I think this is a very pertinent conversation.
For
Very,
sure.
very relevant conversation. As you said, like conflict always comes up
Mhm.
like between people. I think all of my closest friends right now, I've had to deal with like conflict at one point or another or two. Right. I'm sure you could say the same.
Yeah.
In your life.
Mhm.
And yeah, stuff like that. So anyways, thanks for the discussion, Peter.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate that. And you have been listening to Grace Coming to Chats here at GCC Philadelphia, U City, Philadelphia.
You forget our church's name?
I forgot. Yeah, Grace Coming to Church here in Philadelphia. My brain has to like do this like quick switch, and it never happens because nothing is scripted. But if you're new here, go check us out at philly.gracecoming.net. Join us on Sundays for our sermon series on relationships that we're going through right now, which is why we're having this discussion on relationships as well. And we will see you next time.